Message!
Well, as I moved around the state of Louisiana and Mississippi and listened to other people talk about their family history, I soon learned there was a hidden secret in America. What was this secret? What's not in the textbooks that most people who go to Harvard University and other Ivy League colleges wasn't taught? The second coming of slavery. And some books that say it was called worse than slavery. What could be worse than slavery? Well, in slavery as chattel property, they had a reason to protect their property, feed their property, clothe their property. But when slavery was abolished, it had a different look. And I want to take you down that road.
Message!
It's a part of my history, and it is a part of the history that makes America what it is. Let's take that journey. What's not in the history books? The untold history of involuntary servitude, which was another name for slavery, because no one volunteered to go back in slavery. When did slavery end in America? Like most people, I learned that it ended in 1863, but I learned differently. 1863, 1865, as Juneteenth approaches in Galveston, Texas, is saying we're about to celebrate our history of freedom. The Gullah Geechees in South Carolina told me 2 weeks ago, April the 2nd, we got our freedom in 1865. 1944, 1963, in the height of the Civil Rights Movement. What are we talking about? People still being in slavery.
Message!
1973, 2000. Did I miss something? 1973, 2000? I can only imagine my ancestors just rejoicing and being so happy that they are free, and that they probably danced and cried and became emotional probably for 24 hours and then realized, where am I going to go? We have no food. We have nowhere to go. We have no clothes. We have elderly people with us. We have disabled people with us. What are we going to do? So, as President Abraham Lincoln said, well, we would devise a new contract called the Freedmen Bureau contracts. And I do believe in my research that they didn't make their X. If you can make an X, you can make an A. You can write an A, you can write a B. Even the X was forged, forcing children as young as 5 years old to work on these plantations for the remainder of their life, unless they ran away and found freedom. I took the plane and I went to Washington, D.C. to the National Archives and looked in the classification record group 50 and 60. So I'm sitting there reading these documents and the tears is flowing down my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was reading. What do you mean the new coming of slavery? They told us we was free. I soon learned it was on paper.
Message!
The cases that I found revealed that slavery exists in 20 states. How do I know? The records that I'm going to introduce you to will tell you that slavery exists in 20 states. The states that I cover, Louisiana, Mississippi, because that's where my ancestors was in these states here. May and Arthur is still living. We lost May, and she was the modern day Harriet Tubman, because she said, they can't do to me what they haven't already done.
Message!
At least if I'ma die, let me die free.
Message!
I'ma tell it.
Message!
And we held hands. Now let's tell it together, our freedom. The time that I spent with May, listening to our story, and how they had to eat birds, and we can't even imagine trying to eat a little robin or bird eggs just to have food to eat. And I remember one day I wanted to drive to this place called Gilbert, Mississippi. I was frightened just driving there because it feels like the hair on my arm was standing up because, I had to just go instinctively as to where am I? These places that most of those that was enslaved was in isolated communities. Off the main highway, down those dusty roads, no trespassing signs. This is how they was kept enslaved. The Wall family consists of a father, mother, and 7 children. The 5 older children was the ones that was held enslaved. May and Arthur were sharecroppers in Gilbert, Mississippi. At the end of crop year, they was told they didn't make money for the pay. They didn't make enough money to pay for the seeds, the tools, and other items. Each year, like most of the people that was enslaved, try next year, you may do a little better and you can pay off your debt. They never could pay off their debt. First of all, who was going to challenge them? Who was going to challenge the sheriff, the judge, the business owners, the rich farmers? You dare not question them. As May tell it, and this is what she told ABC Nightline, she spent her youth in Mississippi as a slave, picking cotton, pulling corn, picking peas, picking butter beans, picking string beans, digging potatoes, whatever it was, that's what you did for no money at all. Millie and her sister Annie tells of bondage ending in the 60s. Annie is still afraid today. She's afraid to talk about it. She was afraid that day because she thought they was going to kill her. And one day when CNN came to me and they wanted to talk to their father, who was 107 years old at that time, well, he gave me his story. He talked about what he saw, what he went through. He called the names out. And one day while watching TV, he saw this white man on the television, and he thought the man was coming to get him because he shared his story with me. He went into the hospital, and the family banned me for 1 year because they didn't want to lose their father. They was afraid of he was going to have a heart attack. And it was then he said, no, I started talking to her, and I'm going to finish it. Arthur's story. This is May and her 2 brothers. I took them back to Gilbert, Mississippi for the first time in 50 years. And if a picture can tell a story, the fright that was on all 3 of their faces, I couldn't understand that fright, but they knew if anybody passed down the road and saw them, what that could have meant for them. There's only one person that's still living, and that's the man with the dark shirt on. That is Arthur. I'm sorry that Arthur couldn't be here today due to health reasons, but this is in his words.
And we couldn't leave. We was on those people's place from 10 years back. So I don't know who owned all of them, but Lonzo Gard was the main man.
Arthur, his father talked about how his uncle had to dig his own grave. And when he dug that grave, he didn't know what he was digging it for. But they shot him because they wanted to have a relationship with his wife, and his wife said no that day. And once again, you don't tell a white man no in the South. What did that mean? Letters to the presidents of the United States. Who would have thought that after President Abraham Lincoln emancipated those? Thank you, David. That letters would be written to other presidents asking them to free those that were still in slavery. Files from the Department of Justice, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the FBI files. The 3 presidents that was aware that slavery wasn't abolished: Calvin Coolidge, Warren Harding and Franklin D. Roosevelt received letters asking that they abolish this new form of slavery. This letter that Calvin Coolidge wrote, this letter was written to Calvin Coolidge in 1927. In Vicksburg, Mississippi, free people are being herded back to the plantation. The planters hold their laborers at gunpoint. I want to go back there. And when I scanned this document at the National Archives, I said, there's going to be people who do not believe this, so let me just scan it in its natural form. And even with what you see, some people still doubt it. And I begin to understand why May said what she said. Who's going to believe me? And I soon learned who was going to believe me when I spoke the truth. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1942. It brings me to mind my mother was born in 1940. So slavery was well and alive.
Message.
This letter came out of Hiding Valley, Mississippi. 300 to 500 Negroes bound in the shackles of slavery. The plantation is well guarded. Many men and women was killed on these plantations. Letters like this and documents like this made me realize, what am I looking at? Torture, abuse, murders, beatings. I felt, why wasn't this in the history book? Why didn't he talk about this? Why was this the best kept secret in America?
Message.
1944, again, Sunflower, Mississippi. William Henry Huff, the director for the abolished Peonage Committee of America, he was writing, asking the president to end and to eradicate the new form of slavery. Would you please end it? Now, if slavery wasn't in existence, why would we still be asking 3 presidents to end slavery in America? The childhood hometown of Kosciuszko, Mississippi. And this is one of the documents I'll never forget, because when I went to the courthouse and the records was in the attic, and they was told that they don't go in the attic because ghosts is in the attic. My opportunity. I'm gonna go in that attic. I'm gonna make as much noise as I can as the ghost talking. I'm free. And so the one thing I told the ghost, look, I just need you to show me the papers. Show me where it's at. I'm here to set you free. So I just started moving stuff around and making noise to really make them think that ghost was really in the attic. But what was in the attic was these stories that wanted to come out the attic, that they was hiding in the attic. You know, we always think about what's in the attic. Murders was in the attic. Records was in the attic that you couldn't access. This sheriff, he was arresting colored as well as white people on trumped up charges and placing heavy fines to work at the sawmill. And I wrote a letter to Oprah, can you do a segment on this? Never got any reply. But when I was in Zambia, I know I want to get out of there, because when I think about this part of the world, I think about Philadelphia, Mississippi, where those civil rights boys was killed. Once again, my hair stood up on my own, because when I met resistance, when I knew that I was in the courthouse, and I remember this man looking at me, and when he was looking at me, it was like saying, oh, I just wish that we can turn back the hands of time, because you won't be touching those records. So I took my beautiful black golden hand and I touched all the documents, because I knew that he couldn't do anything about it. But in his eyes it said, if I could, You weren't the lucky ones. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, 1943. When I think about Mississippi, most of us that know anything about Nina Simone, that say Mississippi, goddamn. And Mississippi right now is still trying to turn back the hands of time and walk them back. Come on. Jim Crow, Jane Crow, let's turn back the hands of time. We're back at it again. Now this is what another white man was saying about another white. He said, word has a reputation that any Negro born on his plantation must remain there for the rest of his life in 1943. So that means if a child was born in that plantation in 1943, in 1963, he still was owned by this man. $150 just to be born in the sharecroppers' floor or in the cotton field. That's what he was saying. You owe me, and you're not getting away. Before I close out, I met a man named Willie King, and he was one of the finest blues singers in the Mississippi Delta that I met. And he said, Antoinette, he said, they Muddy Waters arranged for me to perform on this plantation, but I had to meet them at the store. And when he met them at the store in 1970s now, they blindfolded him. And they picked him up at the store. And they took him to the plantation. And he said, when I got to the plantation, it was like back in the 1800s. Not only did those that was enslaved talk about it, but there's some who feel like what their ancestors and what their family members did is not right. And it's going to take people to stand up for what is right. Slavery is wrong in any form. It is wrong. And what was done to those like May and like her family, and she went to her grave, but she was free because she told her story.